I think an incredibly important thing when we go out and we try to create an impact in the world is not just that we say like, oh, we need to become world changers, but how are we going to be open and willing to be changed in that process?
Well, change and transformation. Boy, Liz Bohannon nails it in that opening clip for today's podcast. I'm Ken Powell, FCCI's Pathway to Purpose host, and that's at the heart of FCCI's mission to transform the world through Christ, one company leader at a time. Liz delivered today's podcast message several years ago at an FCCI conference, and as she shares in her testimony, it's not so much about changing the company or the business venture, it's about changing the company leader. When the leader becomes more like Christ day by day, abiding in the vine, being in relationship with other Christian business leaders who can provide counsel and accountability, then there's tremendous potential to see transformation in the lives of others when the company and in the community at large. As a catalyst in that transformation process, FCCI stands ready to serve you through our annual conference, our regional events, our business leadership groups, our online content, and so much more. Well, you can learn more about that at fcci.org, and make sure you consider joining us for this year's annual conference in Lake Tahoe. That's September 15 through 18, where messages like the one you're about to hear from Liz Bohannon will fill those 4 days and provide you with tremendous inspiration and encouragement as you pursue God's calling in your life and business. Well, I love this message, Stop Waiting, Start Creating, from Liz, because she digs into the heart of an issue that I think is robbing so many young entrepreneurs and faith leaders from finding joy and fulfillment in their work. There's so much FOMO in our society and an overwhelming sense of pressure to discover our passion and calling and not missing out. So Liz is going to help us navigate those hurdles and pursue a much more organic process of discovery that comes when we are faithful with each next step, and allow God to move us and reveal His will, and not be too consumed with what the final outcome of our life will be, but instead just be in this moment and allow the future to reveal itself and to become whatever God intends through us as we abide in His presence and follow Him today. Here's Liz.
I want to tell you a little story. A few years ago, I found myself in an Ethiopian shoe factory, as one does. And I was in the back of the factory in this kind of 8 by 10 foot windowless room, generously called the Design Lab. And it was kind of filled from top to bottom with old leather samples and kind of old shoemaking machinery. And at this specific factory, every day the bell rings at noon. And when the bell rings at noon, it means it's time to go to lunch. So everybody in the factory gets up. We all go to lunch together. We go to the canteen, and I usually drink a little buna, which is really delicious Ethiopian coffee with the ladies, maybe play some bottle cap checkers with the gentlemen, and then we all go back to the factory together. Well, on this one particular day, I heard the bell ring, and I was working on this project. We were developing ballet flats, and they were super challenging, and I was having all these issues with them, and I was like, I can't, I'm just got to work through lunch. Grabbed a power bar, ate lunch, kind of worked through, was heads down, totally focused on this project, and I have no idea how much time passed when all of a sudden I heard this, and it got completely pitch black. And my first thought was like, okay, we lost power to the factory. That happens all the time. The generators are going to kick in. That's fine. And then I realized that it was completely dead silent. Kind of the little chitter chatter and, people shuffling around that happens when the power goes out. None of that happened. It was completely dead silent. So my next thought, of course, was like, oh my gosh, it's the rapture. It is the rapture. Yep, I'm still here. So clearly all my Ethiopian pals had something real good going on with Jesus, and I missed a memo somewhere along the way. And then my third most correct thought was, oh my gosh, it's Saturday. And on Saturdays, when that bell rings at noon, it's not so that everybody can go to lunch. It's so that everybody can go home for the entire rest of the weekend. So I eventually made my way out of this back room, kind of stumbling through this pitch black factory. I get to the front of the factory where my worst suspicions and fears were confirmed. I had, in fact, gone and gotten myself locked in a factory for an entire weekend. There was these giant steel doors that were padlocked from the outside. And I'm just, contemplating my future in the next 48 hours when I hear these two little voices in the distance. And so I panic and I go and I pick up a shoe last, which luckily is very heavy and hard. And I start banging it up against these steel doors. And I just start screaming the only Amharic word that's coming to mind in my panic, which is salam, which quite literally, ironically, translates to, may God's peace be with you. So, very zen. And so I'm just banging it up saying, may God's peace be with you! And eventually the voices get louder and louder. And these two little ladies come over to the door, and they're the secretaries that sit at the front of the factory. And through not speaking each other's languages through this steel door, they manage to understand that hi, yeah, me, Liz, crazy white girl, got herself locked in the factory. Anything you can do to help me out? Well, turns out the one key to unlock the factory was with a gentleman who had long gone home for the weekend. And I'm horrified to tell you that it was over 2 hours later before they got on the phone, and they were calling the guy, and he got back with the key, and they eventually rescued me from the factory. And this was the celebration that favorite part, and booty slap. So here I was, y'all, I had my master's degree in journalism. I had these huge dreams about traveling the world and writing and reporting on issues that were facing women and girls across the globe. And I was going and getting myself locked in Ethiopian shoe factories, or hustling and literally selling sandals on the side of the highway out of my car. One time, maybe a year into our business, my husband and I were on our way to an event in LA, complete standstill traffic, and I get very, very angry when I'm in standstill traffic and kind of antsy, and I thought to myself, we've got a couple hundred pairs of sandals in the back of this car that we need to sell, and this kind of seems like a pretty captive audience. And so I literally got out of the car, Ben put it in park, I just start walking up and down the highway, knocking on people's doors, asking if they would like to try on a lovely pair of sandals on the side of Highway 5. All of these moments throughout my journey where I would stop and go what the heck? How did I get here? Where did I go wrong? Because this is not what I thought it would look like to go out and to build a life of purpose and passion and impact. But the thing is, that's what happens when we are solutions agnostic. When we care more about finding and defining really interesting solutions than we do, finding and defining really interesting problems than we do at coming to the table with here's our best idea and here's our best solution right off the bat. I didn't know this at the time. But when I showed up in Uganda, pretty aimless, and no one had hired me, no one had offered me a job, I didn't really have a vision for what I was going to do. I just went to go learn, to go show up and learn in the context of community, in the context of relationship, not from, a Gates Foundation report, but just face-to-face, one-on-one from a girl who had grown up in extreme poverty, and learn what issues that she was facing. I didn't know it at the time, but what I was being was solutions agnostic. I was more interested in finding and understanding interesting problems than I was immediately jumping to a solution. I also didn't know it at the time. But being solutions agnostic is one of the core principles and tenets of a larger way of thinking that's called design thinking. Design thinking is when we put more emphasis on being people who go out to find and define interesting problems than we do on people who are kind of obsessed with solutions and believe that solutions are the end-all be-all. In fact, in design thinking, solutions aren't the end-all be-all. They're simply iterations. Every solution is really just a chance to potentially find and more accurately define a more interesting problem. Design thinking, I truly believe it's a whole school of thought. You can learn a ton about it online. It will help you build stronger, more relevant, more robust organizations and communities and products and solutions. But what it also will do is if you apply it to the way that you think about your own life, your own purpose, and your own kind of view of passion and purpose, it's an incredibly fruitful way of thinking. I have had the amazing opportunity throughout my career to travel the globe and do a lot of speaking and listening to people from, 16-year-old girls in rural Kentucky to business professionals in Estonia. I actually didn't know where Estonia was when I first got that invite, and I had to look it up, and it's like, kind of in the Eastern Europe area. And then the next week I got an invite from Georgia, and so I was oh my gosh, I'm blowing up in the obscure Eastern European market. And so I emailed the people back, and I'm like, I would love to come to Georgia. Do I need a visa? What's happening? Tell me all about it. And they were like, oh, okay, well, no visa. We're just about an hour outside of Atlanta. So I've had the opportunity to travel all over the world and really listen to people who want meaningful vocational opportunity. As the CEO of a company that has, we've got a team in Portland, we have over 600 women across the country that sell our products. We now have artisan partners on 5 different continents. I have conducted a lot of interviews for people who want their work to matter. And one of the really interesting things that I've learned kind of in this process of just sitting and listening and learning is how this kind of ubiquitous narrative that is all over Instagram and posters, that line our school walls, this narrative of go find your passion and go follow your dreams is actually affecting people. And I would say that this thing that I think was intended to kind of help inspire and motivate people is actually also creating a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, and kind of this sense of analysis paralysis. I do not believe you can or you will ever find your passion. So how's that for very inspiring? I know, someone quote me on Instagram with that. You're never gonna find your passion because your passion isn't out there waiting to be discovered. Your passion is not behind one specific door waiting for you to make the right decision at the right time and open the right door so that you can discover your passion in some kind of cosmically cruel game of hide and go seek. We're never gonna find our passions because they're not out there waiting to be discovered, but we can build our passions. Now, the semantics between discovering and finding and building and creating, it may just seem like semantics, but I think it's an incredibly important mental shift. Have you ever heard a novelist talk about a great novel? They don't say I waited until I knew the exact right sentence. I waited until I knew exactly how the story was going to end and what that last sentence would be, and then I had permission to start writing. Now, really good authors, what they really talk about is nope, I woke up every single day at 5 a.m. before the kids woke up. And I went to my writing place and I sat in my room and I got rid of distractions and I went and I wrote and I created. And I tried not to edit myself while I created. I let the words get out and then I watched and I built this story as it continued to iterate and to evolve. And at the end, they don't sit back and say marvel at look at my discovery that I made, but rather look at this thing that I created. Look at this story that I built into existence. Here's the thing. I believe that we have to be willing to be surprised. We're so obsessed with this idea of kind of having this linear track, right? I went to school and I studied this and this is my background and then I did this and then I did this and that was how I kind of found my purpose. But I actually believe that if we are people who truly want God to use us to build the kingdom of heaven here on earth, we're gonna have to let go of some of that kind of white-knuckled grip on control and on knowing how the story ends before we start it and be open to being surprised. So speaking of surprises, my name is Liz, and when I was a young adult in my earlier days, there were 2 things that I was very uninterested in. Actually, not even just uninterested in, kind of actively against business and in fashion. So I'm now the CEO of a for-profit fashion company. So for-profit, meaning we spend a lot of our time and energy thinking about profit. We're thinking about margin. One of our sayings is we say hey, no margin, no mission, baby, right? So profitability and investor relations and margin and growth and scalability. And When I was a young adult, I was so against business. I really believed that business was part of the problem. Truly, I was this like very idealistic, bleeding heart kind of journalism student that thought if you want to make a difference in the world, you have a few options. You could be a social worker, you could be a counselor, you could be in like ministry or nonprofit of some kind. But business is kind of like this necessary evil. It's kind of part of the problem. Okay, and we're a fashion company, right? So we started making these kind of scrappy, strappy sandals, and we now have a catalog of over 300 items that come out every season. They're beautiful, they're high-end, they're luxurious. They've been featured in magazines like Vogue and Marie Claire and InStyle, and we've had celebrities like Sophia Bush wear them. But when I was a young adult, when I was in college, just out of college, I was not interested in fashion. Not only was I not interested in fashion, I was in a place where I was like, if you're interested in fashion, what that kind of tells me is that you're probably shallow, materialistic, and you definitely don't have any idea what's happening in Syria right now. So it was super fun to be around, got invited to a lot of parties in college, wasn't judgmental at all. But as evidence in Exhibit A, I was not interested in fashion. So this photo looks like it was taken like right after I emerged from bed after having like a violent stomach flu for a couple of weeks. This was actually the day I got engaged to my husband. So that was good. My girlfriends like tried to stage an intervention to get me out of these like MC Hammer genie pant situation. These pants that I bought for like 25 cents in this secondhand market in Uganda. But here's the thing, we have to be willing to be surprised because there is no area of creation where God can't use you. We actually don't get to tell God where he can and cannot use us. And we might just be surprised if instead of being so obsessed with our solution, what am I good at and what do I have to offer, if instead we come to the table looking for really interesting problems and being willing to be surprised about what that solution might be and what our role might be in it, I truly believe that beautiful things will start to happen. Just the other day, I was speaking and I got done speaking and this man came up to me and he was like, hey, I have to introduce you to this guy. He runs an amazing manufacturing company here in the States, but he really has this heart for Uganda. You guys should totally connect. And I was like, okay, that's awesome. I don't meet people with kind of those two backgrounds that awesome. And so we got on a call about a week later and I told him about Sseko and everything we're doing. And we're the largest non-agricultural exporter in the entire country. And we're trying to build this like best-in-class manufacturing company based in Uganda. And we have this heart for women and for girls. And I was sharing with him about my vision, and then he told me about his work, that he does essentially evangelism in Uganda, which is awesome. That's great. He comes to Uganda and he shares the gospel. And at the end of the call, he said, Liz, he was very blunt, which I appreciate. He was like, Liz, I don't really know why my friend connected us, because it sounds like you're really kind of doing this manufacturing business thing in Uganda, and like we're running really hard on this like ministry evangelism thing. And it blew my mind. I was like, homeboy, like why? Why you gotta take off that manufacturing hat when you show up in Africa? And it's because I believe you kind of think there's only one way to engage here. If I go to Africa, I do evangelism, I do ministry, I do this thing. Meanwhile, he's like this brilliant manufacturing guy back in the US. And at this point, he was ready. He was like kind of done with me. I could tell he was like kind of tired. And at that point, I love that point in a conversation because you're like, I literally have nothing to lose, right? Like ask for the moon because you're already super annoyed and confused by me. And so I was like, hey bro, like here's an idea. What if you use some of your like amazing manufacturing experience to come help us run a better, more efficient manufacturing company in the country that you deeply care about? He got like completely silent and he was like, oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's very interesting. Okay, we could talk about that. Well, that probably 3 months later, he sent some of his top guys from his Kaizen certified factory here in the US over to Uganda. They came in, they like totally overhauled our production floor and did this amazing training with our executive team. Our efficiency increased, our quality control measures increased. It was this amazing example of something that God had called him to, something that God had equipped him with, something that he had to offer. All of a sudden, sudden being used in this context that was very, very surprising to him. But I really believe that if we're open-minded and really interested in finding interesting problems, these types of solutions will start emerging. But when we think we know what that's going to look like, when we say like, oh no, God can only use the missionaries and the social workers and the nonprofit people in the ministry, people to bring the kingdom of heaven to earth, what we do is we kind of start seriously limiting the power and the creativity of the Lord. And not only that, but we start to believe in this narrative that has us waiting instead of creating, right? Waiting until the right crystal clear opportunity or solution presents itself. Waiting until you have the right degree or the right experience or the invitation you need or the permission you need from, your in-laws or from your colleagues or from the lady that like bags your groceries that you feel like you need permission from. But what God has called us to do is to be people who mirror his image and who don't wait for that, but instead create. I believe to get into this spirit of creating and to being really open-minded, it's really, really helpful to channel your inner journalist. So maybe you didn't go to journalism school, but you can pretend to be a journalist. When I showed up in Uganda and I discovered this really interesting problem, 25 of the smartest women in the country not going to college because they couldn't find a way to basically finance their education during that 9-month gap. I immediately, kind of, like a classic do-gooder American, jumped to this solution. This idea that's like, okay, we got to start a charity. We're in Africa. We're working, with women and girls who have been marginalized. Like, I'll go back home and I'll raise money and we'll donate it and we'll send these women to university. Thank God I still had on kind of this like investigative journalism hat, right? I had spent like a couple months just traveling the country, asking questions, kind of trying to get to the root issue. So then when it was time for me to implement this solution, I kind of was already in this mode of just like ask questions, dig a little bit deeper, see if maybe there's something else to the story. And the more I kind of dug and the more questions I started asking, the more I started to becoming really, really convinced that starting a charity in this context was not the right answer. The more I started learning about how nations and regions develop, the more I started hearing things about like GDP and export business and building infrastructure and job creation and growing the middle class. And it started to sound to me a lot like growing a business, which at that point was like not even remotely on my radar. But here's the thing. I really, really believe that when we stay open-minded and when we are not afraid to ask the really difficult questions, that's going to lead us to better solutions. But if you come to the table and you're like, this is who I am, these are my skill sets, and this is the solution, guess what? You're never actually going to ask the really difficult questions. There's something really powerful in our human psyche called confirmation bias, right? Where once we think we know the answer to something, basically we're going to go out in the world and exist in a way where we're only going to talk to people and we're only going to ask questions that we feel pretty confident are going to come back and say like, good for you, right on, I agree, that's the direction to go in. We will lose the ability to really ask good, interesting, critical questions and listen to the answers that might have us against kind of all odds and what we expected to do, pivoting and going in another direction. So here I was in Uganda, and all of a sudden I'm learning about how business can be this incredibly powerful tool to create change. And my entire world turns upside down, right? This is not, I came from a framework that like business was evil, it kind of caused problems. And all of a sudden I'm going like, oh my gosh, I think that I need to start a business. I think an incredibly important thing when we go out and we try to create an impact in the world is not just that we say like, oh, we need to become world changers, but how are we going to be open and willing to be changed in that process? This applies to your businesses. So I started out as a journalist, and then I started this charity, and then I started this like chicken farm. Literally, I was just like, doing market research and walked outside and I was like, I feel like people are really into chickens here. Like, I'm like drinking tea and there's like a chicken running across the living room, and that guy has literally like 87 live chickens attached to the back of his motorcycle. Like, surely there's going to be a market for chickens. As you heard in the video, that failed pretty quickly, and then I invented these really ugly sandals. They're much more beautiful now, and kind of pivoted and iterated into now what has become a full-on lifestyle brand. But it's not just with your businesses and your products and your services. I really believe that this applies to our passions and to our callings as well. And I really believe that if you're out there pursuing your passion, making an impact, and that's not helping to inspire and to equip and to invite other people to do the same, then I don't actually think that that's your purpose. I think what you have there is a little bit of an idol, right? You have this thing that you're desperately grasping at because you think it's going to be the thing that makes you happy, that you think it's going to be the thing that's going to serve you, but in the end, we will end up kind of worshiping at the empty altar of purpose and passion and impact. If it's really what God's calling you into, it's going to inspire and enable and invite other people to find theirs and to become more of who they were truly created to be. You guys heard me read a letter from Agnes, our managing director in Uganda, and I want to tell you a little bit more of a background on her. Aggie grew up about 2 hours outside of Kampala. When she was 13 years old, a village elder who was the same age as her father came to her father and said, "I will give you 20 cows in exchange for Aggie." And Aggie's dad said no, which was completely shocking and surprising to everybody in the entire village, because that was not the narrative. The narrative was 20 cows is a massive bride price. Of course, you're going to hand over your daughter, right? And he said, no, actually, she's really smart and I want her to stay in school. So Aggie stays in school. She goes on. She graduates from high school. He was a single dad, by the way. #dad goals. She goes to high school. She becomes the first woman in her entire village to graduate from college. She gets out into the marketplace. She's qualified. She's got all of this gusto and vision and excitement. And in every single job interview that she did right after graduation, the male hiring director essentially said, like, okay, yeah, I'll give you this opportunity, right, that she's incredibly qualified for. I'll give you this opportunity, but of course, in exchange, I would expect something in return. By the time I met her, she was so demoralized, so frustrated, like, I've come this far, I've come way too far to give up now. And we connected, and I immediately loved her, and I was like, but I don't have a job. I'm running this little scrappy company. We're like bleeding money. I'm not hiring right now. And she looked at me and she said, okay, listen, let me work for you for free as an intern for a month. And I promise that I will provide value to this team. And I was like, okay, well, this is an offer that I cannot refuse. So Aggie started as an intern. She's now the managing director of our entire company. She co-chairs the board with me over in Uganda. She travels all over East Africa negotiating deals and working with our raw materials suppliers. This summer, she's coming here to the U.S. in Nashville, Tennessee, where she's going to stand on a stage in front of hundreds of women from across the U.S., and she's going to be the one to share her story to help inspire women to be brave and to be bold and to take risks and to change the story and the narrative that they were handed. Aggie is changing her village in a way that I never could have. Okay, right? Yes, yay, Aggie. Come to Nashville and hear her talk. Aggie is changing her village in a way that I never could have. 10 years ago, the average girl in that village was being married off by about 13 years of age. And now about half of those women are in school. Because Aggie and her dad said, like, actually that story that we've been given of just how things go and what our roles are, like, it's not good enough for us. We're going to co-create a different future. We're going to go in the face of all of that to change the game, not just for me, not just for my daughter, not just for my little nuclear family, but in a way that is going to create freedom and possibility for the women that come after us. What I love about this is that those women in that village literally don't know me from Eve. They've never met me. They've never heard me speak. I have nothing to do with this. But Aggie has a voice. Aggie has a point of view. Aggie has a story that can connect with and that can move and that can inspire those women in a way that I simply can't. As we go out into the world and we start to look for interesting problems, as we start to not find our passion, not trying to discover it, but instead say, how do we just actively, step by step, with small iterations and allowing it to evolve, become more of who we are created to be, we have the opportunity to bring other people along in that. And that is how we maximize influence. That is how we create an impact. That, I believe, is how we bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. So may we reflect the divine image of the Creator and stop waiting and start creating.
Well, maybe reflect the divine image of the Creator, bringing the kingdom of heaven to earth, to truly engage in our calling, to create, to bring order out of chaos, to live in the reality of thy kingdom come, thy will be done. realizing that through that process we are fulfilling the original mandate given to us in the first garden, the Garden of Eden. We are to take dominion, to rule over our King's estate, to be faithful as His heirs, and to be fruitful, multiplying His kingdom purpose through our priestly calling in business. If we can serve you in any way to accomplish those ends, those KPIs, those kingdom performance indicators, well, please reach out to us here at FCCI.org. And may God, through Christ, continue to be the inspiration and encouragement that you need in your journey leading a company for Christ.